The town was wrapped in fouled, red twilight, the surrounding pine trees skeletal silhouettes against a rapidly darkening void. Lily had slightly misjudged the amount of time that had passed, true darkness just now consuming the town. Every structure was barren in the distance, a gloomy field between the warehouse we stood outside and the center of town where most of the housing development was. Lily and I crouched behind thorny bushes just outside the yawning structure behind us, something we had been careful to leave just the way we had found it. Not a body out of place, nor a hair out of line. "How deep do you think?" Lily whispered, nodding to the city in the distance, barely a faint glow on the horizon from our current vantage point. "The river, I mean." "Enough," I stammered, gazing into the darkness as well and trying to trace the distant river upstream to the dam. "Far more than we could swim. But, as a last resort," Lily continued slowly, watching as a crow scuttled across the rooftop of the warehouse, the sound of flies buzzing still tearing outwards, muffled yet frantic. "As a last resort," I agreed, scanning the rest of our surroundings. The grass rustled with a gust of wind, utter darkness finally consuming everything around us. Several lights flickered in the town ahead of us, several shadows moving in masses to intersect the windows at random intervals. Everything about it seemed wrong. "We try the woods first," I nodded at Lily. "Away from the city. If there's some kind of border patrol, I hardly think they'll be able to watch everything, and I can't imagine any amount of people could erect a fence so fast. Something about that still seems off." "I agree," Lily whispered. "I was wondering about that too. But even then, I still can't believe any of this is happening. I'm afraid how fast we're just accepting this. This is crazy, right?" I nodded softly. "How can we be sure I heard correctly?" Lily continued, looking at me. "Why do you believe what I'm saying? The town could be perfectly fine, even if a few people who happen to be above us were spouting crazy things. It's still too insane to think they were telling the truth. There are bound to be people thinking clearly in the town somewhere." "I'm still not sure I believe everything myself," I stammered, stealing glances back at the dimly lit houses. "But I've seen a lot of things I can't explain recently, and I'm willing to look like the crazy paranoid one and leave even if the town is safe. If we do that, worst thing that can happen is we check back tomorrow and everything is fine. If we stay here and are proven right in our worries, things could be far worse." "What about Sarah?" Lily stammered, rising despite her words and beginning to follow me as I slowly wove towards the woods to our right. "And Max?" "Max can handle himself," I spoke softly, my heart weakening as I coughed up my next words. "And Sarah, I don't know. She didn't look good, Lily. Of course I want to help them, both of them, but right now, my priority is you." I stopped short, limbs freezing as scuffling resounded behind us. I whirled around to see nothing but the empty field stretching out into abyssal darkness. The crops danced lightly in the frigid wind, so much movement flickering through my view that nothing stood out. Lily seemed to have heard the sound too, however, and her hands quickly thrashed into the pockets of her hoodie as she spun around. We stared into the darkness for several seconds, too nervous to make a move. Nothingness stared back at us, not so much as an insect meeting our eyes as the dim, sickled moon crept across the sky. That's when my phone vibrated. I quickly crouched in panic, whipping out the device and trying to shield its glow with my hand as I stared at the screen. Letters, encased in brackets. And yet, that wasn't all. The letters weren't randomly sequenced this time. The text was much smaller, and it clearly spelled out a phrase. Not your sister. My hand quickly shut the device off, my panicked eyes flashing back to Lily's form as she simply stared ahead, beginning to back up as her hands searched her pockets. What did she have in there? That was where she pulled the cleaver from last time, but no, that hadn't even been real, right? I frantically rechecked the phone, seeing the same letters still visible as it rang again. That's when Lily's foot impacted the screen, nearly snapping my fingers as her heel smashed the device to the ground. I jerked back in alarm, watching her gray eyes narrow into slits. No, she hissed as glass splintered under her weight. What did I say? She kicked the device across the dirt, leaving the shattered glass to tumble as the screen went dark. Don't leave me, she continued, bloody hoodie flapping in the increasing wind gusts as light thunder began to rumble in the distance. We talk to no one. I stared at the broken device for several seconds, before letting my eyes slowly creep towards her form. I stammered, watching her teeth slowly peel back her cold lips as her fists balled. You just broke the phone. Her face fractured with sudden realization, gray pupils constricting like a snake as her mouth widened in horror. I didn't, she stammered, quickly scrambling for the dropped device but backpedaling in further terror as I snatched it off the ground first. I don't know what I was thinking, she shook, beginning to back up further as I gripped the phone tighter, eyes narrowing on her. I don't know what got into me, John, she choked, shaking her head. I just wanted to. We can't trust who might be on the other end. I was just suddenly so scared. I don't think I'm thinking straight. What are you hiding from me? I spoke, slowly rising to shaky feet and clutching the phone to my chest as her own hands remained in her pockets. Who are you? Her face broadened in further shock, features muddling in confusion. What do you mean? She coughed, feet suddenly swiveling to stand her ground. Her eyes scuttled with colorless flashes, spider legs of ash twitching from under her lids. Her hands began snaking out of her coat, arms damp with blood from the bodies. Do you know what my phone said? I murmured, nodding back at the screen, trying to turn it on. Nothing, Lily hissed. Both times you pulled it out just now, you just stared at a blank screen. You're lying, I snapped. What are you hiding from me? What did it say then? Lily broke, mouth beginning to twitch. Her eyes suddenly darted upwards to stare into mine, reflecting the crimson of our surroundings. What are you hiding from me, John? I went to speak, but she quickly cut me off. I want to protect you, she hissed, head cocking to one side. I want to follow you wherever you go. But you've been trying to shut me out, haven't you, John? Trying to leave me, your sister. My fingers trembled. Why do you know so much about the sickness? She continued slowly, eyes remaining unblinking as they grew darker with each passing word. Why did you try to keep Marcus a secret from me? I put up my hand, not getting so much as a word in before her irises went alight with flames, grinning teeth splintering into view like the blade of a knife. "You think I wouldn't know about that girl you spoke with during my volleyball game?" she stabbed. "The one with the dual-colored eyes. That's the killer, isn't it, John? Why were you with her?" "How did you?" I gagged. "It's not what it—" "And what about Yoni?" She twitched, eyes boring into me as pinprick pupils slowly carved into view. "You just said he was sick, like Sarah." "How would you know that? No one has seen him for 2 days, John." "Where did he go, John? What did you do to him? What are you hiding from me?" Another voice shrieked into my mind like a horrible, drawn-out scream, but it barely registered as my heart pounded in my ears. "Stop trying to shut me out," Lily grinned, neck nearly breaking as she took a step forwards, eyes crawling with rust. "I'm your sister. John and I can do anything. John would know that. John would trust me. Who are you?" The outside voice again shrieked, much closer this time, sudden lights thrashing into my squinted eyes as 2 dark silhouettes erupted from my peripherals. "I said hands in the air!" The voice shrieked, finally audible now, except still faint as if trapped behind a glass wall. "You trust your phone over me?" Lily hissed, fingers slowly stabbing against my chest as her eyes ate away the entirety of my vision. "When you're the only one hiding things." Her hands slowly crawled to cover the phone, beginning to squeeze the plastic tighter and tighter as I tried to wrench it away. The gun flashed into view then, inches from my skull as I tried to turn away from Lily. The world instantly came crashing down around me, reality exploding from my heaving stomach like vomit as I saw the man standing in front of me, shaking hands, holding the firearm. "Wait!" I instantly shrieked, throwing up my hands and pushing Lily behind me, allowing the phone to go free in my panic. "John and Lily," the man spoke, taking a slight step back as the gun trained between my eyes, his finger instantly pressing against the trigger as he called out to someone else. "We've got 2, stage 3 sick, take—" Something glinted in the faint light, the blade crawling with the chaotic reflections of its surroundings and a hideously shrill flash as it suddenly arced into his wrist, splitting the flesh apart as it resounded with a loud snap. Lily's gray eyes remained dull, her fingers dancing along the handle of the cleaver, ignoring the erupting blood as the man's arm splintered with the knot she introduced. The gun slipped from his grasp instantly, but Lily didn't stop, instead pivoting on her heels and grunting with effort as she wrenched the cleaver out and violently hacked it downwards again. "I swear I trust him," she screamed. "Shut up!" A hideous crack split through the field, the blade having just enough velocity to sever his hand completely, fracturing the exposed bone, leaving the fingers to fall limply to the floor as tendons shattered into the open. No scream escaped his mouth as his eyes exploded open, shock instantly rendering his legs weak as he rapidly collapsed to his knees. The blade was lodged within the flesh of his severed wrist, dragging Lily downwards as he collapsed. "Who are these people, John?" she hissed, fighting with the blade, her slippery, bloody fingers wrenching out the cleaver. "Don't leave me!" Her arms raised above her head, her heel slamming the man's other hand to the floor as the cleaver angled backwards. His eyes widened in sheer terror, his reaction matching my own as it took me far too long to realize that, whether through blind adrenaline, fear, or some combination of the two, Lily wasn't going to stop. Her arms twisted with a violent burst of speed, hacking the blade at his neck. My arms were barely fast enough to knock the glinting weapon aside, her eyes lengthening in unbridled horror and helplessness as the cleaver slashed across the skin of my wrist, my own teeth gritted in agony, my limbs quickly moving to hug her as the man scrambled backwards and a gunshot rang out from behind us. the bullet stabbing into the dirt, inches from Lily. "I trust you. I trust you. I trust you." I breathed in panicked breaths, my right hand shaking violently as I tried to calmingly stroke her hair, my left hand positively rattling as I slowly lifted the man's dropped gun at him, halting his escape instantly. Lily's wild eyes twitched, her heart rate off the charts as I couldn't bring myself to do anything but continue repeating the same phrase. She slowly began nodding, beginning to calm and echo the phrase at great length. "I trust you. I trust you." Her staggering body stepped on the phone as it lay in the dirt, cracking it in half with a brutal snap. We're not sick," I coughed to the man, pulling Lily closer. And if your partner so much as puts his finger on that trigger again, we'll make sure your skull paints the fucking ground." His already frozen limbs grew deathly pale, his eyes flashing behind me to the other man with the gun, his head shaking in panic. The other man just cocked his weapon, my pulse freezing before a sudden voice rang out, that of an 8-year-old boy. "That gun is for your mouth." It spoke calmly and sincerely. "I took the bullets out, Dad." The gunshot was deafening, my heart seizing as I instinctively ducked Lily further into my grasp. It was only when I heard the heavy thump that I turned to see the man's nearly decapitated body on the floor, having staggered back half a step before collapsing like nothing but a sack of meat. Light smoke rose from the barrel of the gun and from his mouth, where the exit wound exploded his skull outwards. The weapon was still in his hand. A figure stood just to his right, slowly walking closer, dress flapping in the wind as a sudden rain began to drive downwards, lightning splitting across the sky. "I do rather wish you'd quit mafficking," Assa hissed, violently slashing her heel upwards before slamming her boot into the man's skull, cracking his neck sideways like silverware in the garbage disposal. "I do rather wish to express regret for my actions the past few days," she exclaimed emotionlessly, wiping her boot on the asphalt and scraping off pieces of the man's flesh and teeth fragments. "Jonathan, my objective was to frame you for the actions of my sister Halogen. As one of the shelter daughters of the Fear family, she could not be bothered to engage with clients properly, or rather, she does not understand the demands of her kind." Her hand slowly came up with the man's gun, aiming it forwards and firing a grouping of 3 shots with horrific accuracy and speed. The kneeling man had no time to even shield himself with his severed hand before the bullets carved from his heart to his skull, his broken form slamming to the ground seconds later. I quickly whirled around and pointed my own gun at Assa, my body still shaking, gray irises flashing to Lily in worry. "What is happening here?" I hissed, having no mood to deal with her flashy language. "Assa, is there or is there not a sickness?" "There is not a bug, Jonathan," Assa spoke. "Only the poison of my sister and her kind. You cannot think clearly because you are among the infected. You should not contribute your nor your sister's actions to your true nature. She means no harm, nor does she mean to distrust you. You likely do not understand your actions either. It is quite remarkable you have managed to stay together." "What is the poison, then?" I hissed, quickly meeting Lily's eyes and gripping tighter as her hand grabbed mine. "And are we or are we not under its effects?" "To an extent you are," Assa affirmed. "I did not speak of you or your sister being poisoned, however. You are both infected with a different plague wrought upon this town." "There's 2 diseases, then," I gagged, finger twitching at the trigger. "What's the difference? Which one did Sarah have? Will Lily and I die from this?" "Neither of you will perish as a direct result," Assa nodded slowly. "But the 2 diseases you speak of are one and the same, merely different stages, Then what are the stages? I gnashed. What progresses them? How is Lily infected if she never came into contact with Halogen's needle? Something tells me we don't have time to keep bantering. Tell me everything I need to know right now. The stages are as trails, Assa spoke calmly, tilting her head, her ghastly gray skin sunken into her hollow face just as Halogen's had been. I will omit all details not pertinent to your understanding. The water supply of your town has long been laced with a catalyst, a paranoia-inducing destabilizer acting on its own. This is, of course, a direct violation of the Fear family's precedence over the region, and was an immediate red flag for the hierarchy, indicating a potential uprising due to infertility. Gamergates have been suspected in your town for several years, but the action of attempting to begin destabilizing the clientele base was a strategically placed final piece of the puzzle, rather than the beginning, as the Fear family suspected. Mutiny had been brewing for several generations without our knowledge, leading us to this current state. Stage 1 of the fictional sickness your town has conjured up is distrust amongst each other, leading to self-isolation. Stage 2 is not in the same plane, however, but rather a different, tangential strategy entirely, with different means and different ends in which to. My eyes twitched, finger pressing against the trigger. I finally understood. I didn't follow a single word of what she had just said. I understood something else entirely. I don't have time for this, I seethed, cutting her off mid-sentence. Answer me this one question right now, and do it honestly or I'll blow your fucking head off. Her eyes erupted in horror, genuine confusion arcing through her face. Which of the Fear daughters is still alive? I hissed. What? She staggered, putting out her hands. You heard me, I stabbed. Either Ness or Assa is dead. You are one of them, and I don't care which one you're pretending to be right now. There haven't been two this whole time. Which are you really? Her face twitched, her head bowed, arms pressing rigidly against her sides. I am Assa, she gritted. I told you that. But my sister did not die. She's been dead for a long time. I cut her off. And just how many years has Ness or Halogen been dead, huh? Needle teeth began cutting into the flesh of her own lips as she bit down in frustration. I'm keeping both alive, she whispered to herself, bowing her head. And I told you not to say that name. So, you're actually Ness, then? I spoke, watching her eyes alight with fire. Her teeth ground together, shearing flesh away in bloody flakes, but she said nothing. What happened to Assa, Ness? I hissed. Why do you feel the need to pretend to be her? Your dead sister. Why introduce yourself to me as someone who doesn't exist anymore? Fake their verbal quirks. Her fists balled, the sound of churning flesh slowly reaching my ears as hideous needles peeled out from scarred wrist tissue, one significantly shorter than the other, broken off at the tip. She slowly pulled yellow from her dress and slung the coat back over her shoulders, putting her arms through the sleeves. Her voice loudly alternated static-filled frequencies before finally settling on Halogen's voice. All right, John, she stammered, quickly zipping up her coat in embarrassment, her personality flipping. I ask that you please stop this. Her eyes nervously flashed around the room, redness spreading through her face. I will tell you what you need to know, but not here. Others will come. Force me, I spoke, again training the weapon between her eyes. Can you not force me to drop this gun and come with you? Lily's hand gripped harder around mine. I cannot, Halogen stammered, flinching away. This is what you did not let Assa explain. Your current affliction or ailment is separate from what gives control over a client. That is the difference between the stages. You possess the catalyst within you from the water supply and from my saliva, but you do not possess the neurotoxin, which destabilizes in 4 days. I have no ruling over your thoughts. You could pull the trigger now. I would not be able to stop you. I flinched, such a sudden admittance causing my stance to falter. John, Lily spoke softly. We shouldn't try. I ask that you please don't shoot me, however. Halogen spoke softly. I need your help. I shall tell you everything about my family and myself, if you offer me your faith in return. Without trust, we cannot hope to prevail. Is this not what you've said? It's not, I hissed. I said that without trust, we couldn't catch the killer. Her eyes shuddered slightly, flicking nervously to the sides. And yet, it seems I've found them. I spoke slowly, feeling the weight of the gun in my hands. And it seems that in this case, trusting you would have led me further from them. There are bigger issues at play here, Halogen flinched. So very many things you do not understand about me. Her hands contracted at her sides, eyes dancing along the ground. It would seem you've likely suspected all along that I was merely pretending to play the role of two sisters. If you knew we were one and the same, why is it you would have entrusted your friendship with Assa, and not with me? I didn't suspect, I sighed, lowering the gun. It would seem you've caught me as well. I knew all along that I was talking to the killer. Your disguise is not that good. Halogen's eyes searched me, Lily growing positively horrified. But I never wanted to catch them. I continued softly, feeling my lungs expand as I finally spoke my thoughts out loud. I just wanted to understand. The minute you showed up, someone so clearly the killer I had been looking for, I knew there was more at stake than what I could see. I wanted to talk to you, said all that stuff about friendship and catching the killer because I just needed to know what exactly the stakes were. I knew you were playing with me, knew I was just a pawn in something larger, but I was fine with that. You've single-handedly turned this entire town against me, even made my own sister suspect me as a serial killer. Her dual-colored eyes sparked lightly, widening. Lily's hand slid up to my arm, squeezing even tighter as she pressed her face into my shoulder. There was nowhere else to sink, I continued slowly. If the killer was finally moving to close the deal, contacting me, even if it was simply to frame me once and for all, I just needed to understand why. Why you were ruining my life. I figured I couldn't stop it. But if you were willing to talk to me, I was willing to listen. John, Halogen stammered, ghastly face glowing red. It's not like... So stop lying to me, I shouted, causing her to flinch back in horror as I lifted up the gun again. The reason I don't trust you is because you've done nothing but manipulate. The reason I don't want to be your friend is because you don't even know what that means. Halogen took a step back, eyes snapping wide. To you, a friend is just someone else you can control, I hissed, watching her wilt under the barrel of the gun. If you think I want to be around someone like that, Maybe you're not as smart as you seem." She stammered, continuing to back up, forcing me to begin walking forwards just to keep her in my sights. You don't understand," she coughed, voice beginning to nervously shift between countless frequencies, modulating between voices in the middle of words. "I don't think that. I'm trying to save the town," I hissed. Framing me would have calmed the hysteria and kept the residents safe from whichever group you're working against. Her irises flashed with sheer disbelief, nearly tripping over herself as she continued to stumble backwards and choked out, "How did you?" "Lily and I figured it out," I cut her off. "Because we trust each other, and because we don't try to mold each other, we try to understand each other. Together, we can get through anything. We've done it before. Don't you dare underestimate us. If you're truly on our side, you better start explaining things, and if you so much as think about lying to us." Halogen finally stopped backing up, her face utterly horrified. "We'll be the killers you wanted us to be," Lily continued for me. Black saliva spilled from Halogen's mouth, her limbs twitching. "First things first," I hissed, finger resting on the trigger. "What are you?" Her face stared at me for several seconds, silence descending to fill the cold air as rain continued to obscure her gangly form. Slowly, however, her eyes began piercing through the fog, blue and gold narrowing in a horrific smile as a grin slashed across her face with a leisurely carving blade. That's when I realized how foolish we had been. Halogen had backed up so far that we were now standing where she had been, and I could already see the strands of wire faintly shimmering across the ground past our feet, leading all the way back to her hands. "Now that, John," she cocked her head, "I cannot tell you." Her hands thrashed, my finger having no time to press down before it became utterly unresponsive, the gun slipping from my dead limb. I impacted the ground with a heavy, unfelt thud, Lily's body sprawling out beside me seconds later, eyes widened into the far-off distance. "Ah!" Halogen suddenly cried, quickly running over and kicking the gun aside, apologizing profusely as she knelt down beside me. I'm sorry, John. That just seemed like a cool thing to say in the moment. I've never actually tricked someone like that before. It was kind of like in the movies, you know? I'm sorry. Of course, I will tell you. I'll tell you everything. I'm done lying. But you and your sister cannot remain together. You may trust each other a remarkable amount, and as a result, you may be able to avoid turning on each other, especially after this first experience, but your combined suspicion of others will only amplify into a dangerous mentality. This is nothing new, John. The two of you would have inevitably shot me if I allowed you to continue feeding off each other. Left unchecked, the two of you may have slaughtered the entire town. Please don't hate me, but I need to save this place, not destroy it. Her foot raised, my paralyzed limbs frantically trying to shield my head from what I was sure would come. As if I had a chance. Darkness.